Nathan here. Just wanted to let you know to listen through the credits for a Marvel-style stinger and a special announcement. Now, on with the show. Live from Ogasawara, this is the Monster Island Film Vault, Episode 6, Nick Hayden versus King Kong Escapes. Hello, kaiju lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, the caped curator of the Film Vault, Nathan Marchand. But today I am joined by another returning guest, another golden ticket holder here on Monster Island, the tourist, my friend, and fellow writer.
Hello, I am Nick Hayden.
Welcome back, Nick.
Yes, it was Jimmy brought me in. We had to parachute out of his plane on the way here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he took me the whole 9 yards to get here the cool way.
Hot dang.
Yeah, Jimmy, does he not do that? Do you not do that normally?
Really? How come you didn't do that with me? I mean, come on, man. Oh, I'm not cool enough for this? I see how this works.
So yeah, we got along pretty well.
Yeah, he's trying to relive his glory days from the war in space.
Yeah, he was kind of limping afterwards. He didn't let me. Well, I shouldn't talk about
it. Jimmy, calm down. I'm sorry. It didn't mean to make you have a flashback to the war in space. It's gonna be okay. It's okay, Dan. It's okay. We good? We good? All right.
All right. Good.
Sometimes he has spells. Anyway, we are not here to talk about poor Jimmy, as cool as that would be, because he's got plenty of war stories, I'm sure. But we are here to talk about what is actually a first in many regards on this show. We are here to talk about King Kong Escapes, which is not the first Japanese film I've covered on this show, but this is the first Ishiro Honda movie that we have talked about on this show. And I'm really excited about that because, as you remember, Nick, I did an independent study on Ishiro Honda back when I was in grad school, and that was tremendous fun. I did not cover this film, but I covered a lot of his other films, and a lot of that material will then get used in some later episodes.
Nice. Good.
And then after we talk about this interesting movie.
Interesting, yes.
Yes. Our Toku topic for today will be, this will be an interesting one, I think. We will be talking about a topic that I find fascinating, which will be the parallels between Toho's Japanese and American co-productions and Japan-America relations. But before we can do any of that fun stuff, I have to fulfill my contractual obligations and read Jimmy's entertaining info dump to get everyone caught up on this movie. If by some act of God you're listening to a podcast about a movie you haven't seen.
I've done it.
So have I. But anyway, moving on. King Kong is a comical and protective force of nature. However, being a giant gorilla, he displays some anthropomorphisms like wiping his nose. He takes a liking to Susan Watson and defends her from Gorosaurus and Mechani-Kong. He is later hypnotized by Doctor Who to dig for Element X. The ferocious Gorosaurus is a dinosaur living on Mondo Island who attacks Kong because he wants to eat Susan, but is killed by the big ape. A presumably hungry giant sea serpent swims toward the explorer to attack the crew, but is defeated by Kong. Mechani-Kong is an obedient robot modeled after King Kong by Doctor Who to dig for Element X and is later used to attempt to capture or kill Kong. The stoic and intelligent UN soldier Commander Carl Nelson leads an expedition to the South Seas to find oil and to study Kong on Mondo Island. After being captured by Doctor Who, he seeks to foil the mad scientist's schemes. His clever and heroic second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Jiro Nomura, assists with these missions while trying to save Susan from henchmen and monsters throughout the film. Lieutenant Susan Watson is the kind and sympathetic go-go boot-wearing nurse who tries to keep the Explorer crew healthy. After finding Kong, she uses his infatuation with her to calm him down or direct his actions. The greedy and maniacal Doctor Who is a caped scientist mining the powerful Element X to sell to any governments willing to pay. Madame Piranha, a mysterious and cunning secret agent, finances Doctor Who's mining operation on her government's behalf, but later betrays him when he threatens innocent lives by sending Mechani-Kong to Tokyo. The human and monster plot lines are unified. The characters' actions are always connected to the kaiju, whether that be finding, controlling, or eluding them. While Mechani-Kong is his tool, Doctor Who is the problem. He hypnotizes Kong to dig for Element X, but the control devices are destroyed by radiation. Later, Kong breaks out of his cage, which distracts him and his henchmen long enough to let the protagonist escape. Doctor Who sends Mechani-Kong to chase Kong, but the robot is too slow to catch him. He sends Mechani-Kong to recapture Kong in Tokyo using a flashing light to mesmerize the big ape, but Nomura shoots it with a rifle. The robot fights Kong until he grabs Susan and climbs Tokyo Tower, where Doctor Who speaks through the machine and threatens to drop the woman. The problem is solved by King Kong with help from the protagonist. Kong pursues Mechani-Kong up Tokyo Tower, forcing the machine to drop Susan, whom he catches and puts on the tower. He battles Mechani-Kong at the top of the building until Madame Piranha destroys the robot's controls on Doctor Who's ship, after which the robot loses power and falls to its destruction. At daybreak, the protagonists lead Kong to Doctor Who's ship, and the ape pummels it, killing all aboard. The script by Takeshi Kimura under the name Kaoru Mabuchi and William J. Keenan is a simple and straightforward story that fuses elements of the kaiju, super spy, and sci-fi adventure genres. The pacing is brisk, leaving the characters underdeveloped. The special effects were directed by the legendary Eiji Tsuburaya, who was excited to work on another Kong film after 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla. He had loved King Kong since seeing the original 1933 film as a child, and his enthusiasm shines through. The film features his trademark techniques including suitmation, miniatures, rotoscoping, animation, and puppets. The Kong suit, which was covered with dog fur, is a marginal improvement over the previous one with its more articulate and expressive face, but it still looks bad when wet. The Gorosaurus and Mechani-Kong suits look fantastic by comparison. Since the monsters are smaller, the models are larger and more detailed than in most kaiju films. The rotoscoping does an effective job of creating the illusion that the characters are interacting with Kong and Mechani-Kong. The Tokyo Tower model the suit actors climb is an incredible set that painstakingly replicates the building. This is a light film, although its silliness comes from the material and not the acting, which creates some tonal unevenness with the serious performances and often violent images. There is a moderate amount of gravity since Doctor Who is presented as a serious threat despite his outlandish plan. With an island of monsters, a powerful element, and giant robots, this is a sci-fi fantasy story. As a kaiju film, it isn't experimental because it recycles many elements from Toho's growing library of monster movies. However, it is experimental as a Kong film because it was the most science-fictional story, complete with a mecha, to feature the big ape. The film reinforces the style of 1933's King Kong with its island of dinosaurs, greedy capitalists, human-monster romance, and tower climbing. It also reinforces the styles of King Kong vs. Godzilla with its lighter tone and comical Kong, and the King Kong show with its setting, characters, and plot. However, it does expand style in one regard. Susan is a sympathetic love interest for Kong, a trope that will be repeated in subsequent films. The film was commissioned by Rankin-Bass Productions as a loose adaptation of their popular King Kong show animated series, which was produced through Toho's rival studio Toei. To that end, it was meant to be an entertaining romp for children, which was quickly becoming the primary audience for kaiju films. It also commemorated Toho's 35th anniversary. The film had a budget of 170 million yen, or $472,000, but Japanese box office numbers are unavailable. It didn't crack Kinema Junpo's list of top-grossing films for the year when released July 22, 1967, the year of the kaiju since every major studio released a kaiju film then. It was released by Universal June 19, 1968 in the United States, where it grossed $2.18 million. While it received mixed reviews from critics, it has gained a positive following in the kaiju fandom. It currently holds a 5.6 with 1,962 ratings on IMDb. Universal's dub version features Rhodes Reason re-recording his own dialogue and Paul Frees voicing Doctor Who and most of the other male characters. Linda Jo Miller didn't dub herself because she was only a model and not a member of the Screen Actors Guild. 8 minutes of footage was trimmed from the film, although 2 scenes removed from the Japanese cut, an introductory scene for Susan and a longer conversation between Nelson and Madame Piranha, were reinserted. Mechani-Kong was called Robot Kong, and Madame Piranha's name was changed to Madame X. There are several forces at play. Doctor Who discovers the largest deposit of Element X on Earth, which he reveals only to potential buyers. Madame Piranha is an agent of an unspecified communist country that seeks to use Element X to build its own nuclear arsenal, so she makes a deal with him, only to betray him later when he endangers innocent lives. There is a brief culture clash between the protagonist and the crazy old hermit on Mondo Island, since only Nelson can understand him. Civilization clashes with nature when Doctor Who unsuccessfully tries to mine Element X with Mechani-Kong, and when he tries to enslave Kong. This also happens when the protagonists are attacked by the monsters on Mondo Island. While the film seems devoid of substance, it does have several themes. Doctor Who's arrogance, connivance, and greed eventually get him and his henchmen killed. Madame Piranha foregoes her mission to protect innocent people and free the protagonists. She also exemplifies self-sacrifice when she dies destroying Mechani-Kong's controls. Susan is sympathetic toward Kong, which tames the savage beast. He in turn is willing to defend her out of his affection for her. The film ends with Nelson saying Kong has, quote, had enough of what we call civilization, implying the big ape doesn't want to deal with humanity's problems, which aren't present in nature. I have fulfilled my contractual obligations. It's Toku Talk time. Now that we've gotten that out of the way.
Good work.
Yes. And through the magic of editing, we have slipped away and watched this movie in the island's screening room.
It's a nice screening room.
Yes. Yes, I think so as well. So, Nick.
Yes.
Fresh out of the screening room.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this movie?
It was a fun movie, actually. I didn't really know what I was getting into. It's ridiculous plot-wise, but it's weird because it's filmed really nice and has this kind of good soundtrack, and everyone's very serious, except there's also a mechanical ape and and Doctor Who. Yes, that doctor. Not that doctor.
Yeah, is it what the heck, Jimmy? It's not that Doctor Who. Although there are some very weird parallels between the British Doctor, not Doctor Who, but the British Doctor and Doctor Who in this. But we'll get to that later.
So it's an interesting combination, but it moves fast. It's it's just there to be fun. I was enjoying it. It was pretty lighthearted, so we're making some comments and jokes as we go.
It's a weirdly riffable movie, but I riff because I love.
Yeah, it's that sort of movie. It's not like you're like, oh, I can't get through this. It's like, oh, this is fun, but also kind of ridiculous. So,
which is to be expected, honestly.
But it was sometimes like, why are they hypnotizing Kong? Why did they just hypnotize someone else to do their work?
This is not a tight script at all.
But simultaneously, Kong's meeting Susan, and you've got this nice theme that comes back, and it's it really works.
A lot of the books and such that I was reading commented on that scene, actually saying that they thought it was the best scene in the entire movie.
It was very effective, and I mean, I have not watched much Honda. But he knows what he's doing.
Oh
cinematography wise, it's worth much more.
In fact, actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because one of the things I learned about this film is this was actually the last time Honda worked with his most major cinematographer.
Okay.
Yeah, his cinematographer's name was Hajime Koizumi. Unfortunately, after this, they stopped working together. The official reason is because Toho wanted to give other cameramen chance to work with Honda, but some people theorize that it was because Honda was disappointed with the guy's most recent work.
Oh. I mean,
choose your own adventure on that one.
There's some nice shots when they're leaving. Kong's just sitting in front of the island in the water.
Yes.
I mean, it's not as iconic, obviously, as the first King Kong.
No, and it's very different.
And most of it's not trying to be that. I mean, it has that same sort of breakneck pace, but it's not as frantic or as even quite as brutal as the original King Kong. No,
although one of the best descriptions I heard of this movie was that it was silly and savage.
Yeah, because sometimes just kill people around oh, hi, I'm going to shoot you 3 times, you hermit.
Yeah. Doctor Who is very fond of that pistol, and he whips it out several times.
Okay, let's talk about Doctor Who, okay?
Yes.
So
he inspired my wardrobe today. That's why I'm sporting this cape.
It's a nice cape. So is that, Jimmy, is that part of the budget for Nathan, or?
It's not on the budget. It's coming out of my paycheck. I am going to have words with the Monster Island Board of Directors because this was not a cheap cape.
You can't work under these conditions.
Yeah, you're telling me.
So I was actually hoping that I could get my own cape, but
I'll see what I can do.
So, okay, so Doctor Who, perfectly, ridiculously mad scientist, like he's very smug. He has perfect hair. He decides the best way to mine this unobtainium. Basically.
Element X, which they never really explain what the stuff does. There is some inference that it's like plutonium because Madame Piranha says that her country's going to use it. No, Doctor Who says tells Madame Piranha your country's going to use it to build a nuclear arsenal. Yeah. So I guess it's plutonium, but it's one small step above unobtainium, which if you've seen Avatar, you know what I'm talking about. And I still have a huge beef with the unobtainium.
And he decides the best way to mine this is to make a giant mechanical version of King Kong, which to me is not the most cost-effective way of doing things, but I'm not a mad scientist, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. By the way, the actor's name is Hideo Amamoto, and I think he honestly might be my favorite actor in this whole thing, which is saying a lot.
He's so much fun.
Yeah, and that's saying a lot because this is a movie with the great Akira Takarada. That's, like I said, that is saying a lot. This guy is wonderful.
He makes it's so much fun. I mean, every scene he's in, he's like, it's just fun.
I mean, and Doctor Who could do everything. I mean, he's a conniving businessman, so he's kind of our Carl Denham in this because he's the one who exploits Kong, or he tries to exploit Kong.
He's the international Judas.
Yes, I love all the poetic terms that are used to describe him by the crazy old hermit when he dies, and then by the Captain Nelson. Oh, Commander Nelson.
Yeah.
He's the international Judas. He was an Oriental skeleton with burning eyes, with the burning eyes of the devil, and a gutter rat.
I mean, the movie would have been much less without Doctor Who being. He wasn't necessarily played over the top. He just had this smug mad scientist presence.
I know,
which was just a lot of it was a good thing.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, as the movie progresses, we start to realize just how broad of a skill set he has.
He has ninja skills.
Yeah, he knows martial arts. He's good with guns. He's an inventor.
He can hypnotize.
Yeah, he's a chess master.
He's not particularly good about understanding how radiation affects technology.
Yeah, that seems to be his hubris. Yeah. He doesn't understand the concept of radiation affecting technology because he keeps sending things with technology into the cave where Element X is, and they all keep shorting out on him. It's did you learn nothing from the robot?
Like Mechani-Kong.
Mechani-Kong.
Yeah, Mechani-Kong. He's like, hey, figure out what went wrong. Apparently they never bothered with that.
Yeah, because then he puts devices in Kong's ears that are supposed to allow him to control Kong, and they short out in 5 minutes.
And he must be a chess master because he made sure they captured those 3 guys before he even needed them.
Yeah, he was saying, hey, go capture them. They'll help us control Kong. Oh, wait, I can hypnotize Kong. Yeah. So I'm like, wait a minute, then why are you capturing the protagonist? Yeah, but then after that, it's like, I anticipated that my technology. So it's like, I'm just picturing him. Yep. It's like, that wasn't a mistake. I anticipated that my technology would short out. And now I have you.
So we have robots, we have hypnosis, we have all kinds of cool things. And honestly, though she's never named Madame Piranha, was honestly probably the most nuanced character we had. Yeah, and played by the great Mie Hama, who was fresh off of being a Bond girl at this time. There's some interesting connections. I mean, this movie has a lot of super spy elements in it. Yeah. And what I find interesting is you have Mie Hama, who was in You Only Live Twice, the Bond movie from that year with Sean Connery, where he goes to Japan. Okay. And what's interesting is in the same movie, another Bond girl was played by Akiko Wakabayashi, who was in a Godzilla movie just a few years before this.
And both of them were in King Kong versus Godzilla.
Nice.
And in fact, in King Kong versus Godzilla, it was Mie Hama who got picked up by Kong when he climbed a building.
Okay.
So here she is in another King Kong movie, but she's not the love interest.
No.
It's funny how everything works together here. It's great. But yeah, you're right. She is the most nuanced character. She's
the only one that really grows in any real way.
Yeah. There's a massive amount of underdeveloped characters
but
in
the
this.
thing is, like, I think the best way to approach this film is really as almost like a...
It's a live-action cartoon.
Yeah, live-action cartoon, some sort of, like, just pulpy sitcom. Not sitcom, I didn't mean that. A pulpy comic book.
Yeah.
Like a dime novel.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. And
yeah, you really have to go into this knowing that the movie operates on cartoon logic. I mean, it's based on a cartoon series with a really catchy theme song.
Yes.
But you have to go into it with that, or else you're going to be nitpicking. We were doing that already because we were sitting there thinking, Doctor Who's first plan to get Element X is to build a giant robot gorilla. And then that doesn't work, so I'll get the real gorilla, the real giant gorilla.
And so, honestly, if the idea that a scientist makes a giant robot gorilla to get a special element sounds interesting to you, you're in the right mode.
Yeah.
If you something that sounds dumb, probably shouldn't watch the movie.
Yeah, but
because
then
you'll just not enjoy it like it was meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, and then because you start thinking to yourself, look at all this other tech he has. He has hypnotism technology that can hypnotize giant monsters. Why not turn that on the protagonist? Why not sell that?
He really enjoys just his outlandish way of doing things. And again, I think if you take it in the right tone, it's a very enjoyable movie. As long as you realize it's just kind of a fun adventure. And again, it has some of those elements, kind of dime novel sort of stuff. You know, the bad guy's really bad and the good guy's really bad, and someone repents in the middle.
You mean the good guy's really good?
Did I say that? Yes. No, that's modern films, and the good guy's really bad.
Yeah, Jimmy, I riffed him before you did in your notes.
But it's very kind of that dime novel, good, bad. Someone redeems themselves. Everyone lives happily ever after. The bad guy gets their just desserts, and it's satisfying that way. I mean, when Kong just beats up the boat at the end, you're like, cool. And then you see Doctor Who just like bleeding from the mouth, like, oh,
yeah,
that's not what I needed. But
rated G for the kids. I can't believe that. Like this,
so much fun.
This actually has an MPA rating, and it's G. And I'm thinking
Most
this
of it
is
should be
the
fine.
nastiest G-rated movie I've ever seen. You got people bleeding, a dinosaur getting its jaw broken, except this time it just foams at the mouth because Subaraya said no blood with the monster fights because we can't show that to the kids. But Honda's like, yeah, but I'm going to have all the people bleeding all the time. But it was a different time.
It was.
It was a very different time.
So Kong was interesting because I'd only ever seen the original Kong last time I was here.
Mm-hmm. And you've seen the Peter Jackson.
The Peter
remake.
Jackson, but I'm kind of going chronologically here. Mm-hmm. Again, we came to the conclusion for the original Kong that he was very bestial. It was hard to see him as protagonist. This one I could see as protagonist. Mm-hmm. He had that more of that
anthropomorphisms.
Thank you.
Use your words.
I know not how. Now, his face took me a while to get used to. It's a little funky. Like, I like his eyes most scenes, and other times I'm like, you look a little stoned or something.
Well, if you'd seen King Kong versus Godzilla, that would make sense because he gets drunk in that one. But it's funny. You pointed something out that I can't believe I never made this connection. I had mentioned to you that this came about because of Rankin-Bass, and you said Kong looks like the Bumble
He does.
from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Like, how did I never think of this?
The first shot of him in his cave, like his mouth's kind of open, you have his teeth, and I'm like, it looks just like the Bumble. And later on, I don't think that as much, but the first scene of him sitting kind of slumped in his cave felt very Rudolph.
Very Rudolph, yes.
So.
Bumbles bounce.
Man, you got Cornelius down in the North Pole with Doctor Who would have been awesome.
That was the other thing. I was just like, I have now seen everything. King Kong is in the North Pole. I bet Doctor Who killed Santa to get that base.
What do you think Weapon X, that's a whole different issue. Element X is just the corpse of Santa.
Oh, that's dark.
Rated G, everyone.
Rated G.
So anyway, I really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah. What's interesting is when I pre-screened this before you came over, and I wrote down a bunch of times where having seen the original movie, you probably noticed a lot of these as well. There's a fair amount of homages to the original film in this. Several of them that I wrote down is, the fight with Gorosaurus, the dinosaur, who looks infinitely better than that Kong suit.
Yeah, you need a good dinosaur fight.
Yeah, and so it's an homage to the T-Rex fight.
Yep.
Has some similar choreography, but what's also interesting is Kong finds Susan, the love interest in this one, who's blonde, I might add. He took a little break with a brunette with Mie Hama in King Kong vs. Godzilla, but now he's back to blondes.
Yeah, blondes, yeah.
Yeah. So he puts Susan in the tree, and he fights the dinosaur, and wins the fight by breaking the dinosaur's jaw, but as I mentioned before, it was supposed to bleed. They didn't make it bleed. It foamed at the mouth, so I guess Gorosaurus has rabies.
Yeah, something like that.
So he didn't die because Kong broke his jaw. He died because rabies.
Yeah.
And then we have another little monster. Well, not little. We have a giant snake or a sea serpent or whatever, which is kind of like the original movie. It wasn't an actual serpent. It was a long-necked dinosaur in it, but it tries to constrict Kong, and he fights that in the cave. So you have the same thing here, except it's an actual giant snake. Yes. But what I find interesting is it dawned on me that there are also several things that this movie anticipates that happen in later Kong films. In particular, with this giant snake, there's a giant snake in the 76 remake.
Okay.
Which is the only other thing on Kong's island, apparently, because there are no dinosaurs.
Just a giant snake.
Just the giant snake, which is one of the things that makes the 76 movie a little lame, but we'll get into that in a future episode.
I have to say, I gotta give props to Kong. Like, he has really good rock throwing abilities. Like, he throws one rock and hits the snake on the head. I'm like, man,
I wanted a cartoon sound effect.
Yeah. Blonk.
Bronk.
And then birds around the snake's head. And
oh, yeah, that would have been great. Yeah. That would have been great. And then Nelson is essentially Captain Englehorn.
Yeah.
And Nomura is pretty much Jack. Yeah, and we've already said Susan is Anne.
The love thing's very weak. I mean, it's like, oh, they're in love. And like, okay, yeah, I guess I know that, but we've seen nothing.
It's one of those, you're being told and not shown. Yeah.
I mean, there was more of like Piranha and trying to hit on. Man, she's like every 5 minutes, like, I got a new outfit today. I mean, in that scene,
she is borderline Padme level of wardrobe.
Hats,
and she loves hats.
Good hats.
Actually, all the women in this movie have a thing for hats because Susan has that really snazzy hat for her uniform.
They're good hats. Like, I really think that it needs to be Piranha's hat shop and Doctor Who's hairdresser. He had some nice hair, some nice full. I like it. It was good.
Just like in the 33 film, we have Kong being captured and exploited.
Yes.
So Doctor Who is essentially Carl Denham.
Again, yeah.
Yep. And then at the end, as you have to do with a King Kong movie, you got to climb a tower at the end. In this case, it's Tokyo Tower, not the Empire State Building.
And a beauty kills the beast because Madame Piranha kills Mechani-Kong.
Yeah, Mechani-Kong.
Mechani-Kong.
Yeah, she shorts out his controls, and then he can't move anymore, and he falls from the tower. And Kong's like, oh, I win.
Fake Arab proverb comes true.
Yep. But Doctor Who, it's funny. Every source I looked at spelled his name WHO,
which is really
like
weird.
The British television show.
Which is weird.
But the subtitles for the movie that we watched tonight spelled it HUU, like a Chinese name, because I think the implication is that Doctor Who is supposed to be Chinese. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting if you know Japan's history with China, but moving on. At the same time, I mean, we made the joke earlier about him having the same name as the British hero, but he looks suspiciously like John Pertwee, who played the Doctor on Doctor Who
after the
I think starting in the late 60s and into the early to mid 70s. But this movie predates that by several years. Like I said, he looks a lot like John Pertwee, dresses a bit like John Pertwee, because John Pertwee's doctor wore a cape.
Yes, he did.
Yet, at the same time, the way his
persona is much more like
his persona is more like the Master, who first appeared on Doctor Who during John Pertwee's time as the Doctor, and this movie still predates that. So it's insane. So it's almost like the people working on Doctor Who saw this movie and it inspired them with their casting and their writing later. I have no idea if that's true. It is pure conjecture on my part, but I love the idea. And it was funny. You made a joke about how you thought Peter Cushing, if there was an American version of this, Peter Cushing could have been Doctor Who. And I said, wait a minute, he was the Doctor Who, because there were 2 movies made about this time where Peter Cushing was the Doctor. So he's an unofficial Doctor because those are out of canon with the show. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh. This movie is this weird nexus of stuff.
Of just weird sci-fi, spy, kaiju stuff. Yeah, it's just it's a nice mixture. It's not like it doesn't mix too much stuff. Like, it's just the right balance of like, hey, here's some kaiju stuff, here's some spy stuff. It's not cramming stuff in there.
No.
But it you got hypnotism, but you don't have like a 10 million, weird things. But it was fun. Yeah.
You think this would have worked as a plot for an episode of Doctor Who? I think Jimmy might be on to something.
Yeah. Why has there not been a King Kong Doctor Who?
They've had monsters on Doctor Who.
No,
some giant monsters.
And probably mechanical monsters.
Oh, plenty of those.
Well, yeah, that's true. They're all the mechanical monsters. So yeah, I could see that.
I'm just going to say this since we're on the subject of Mechani-Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Mechani-Kong, as all of the Godzilla fans know, Mechani-Kong is the inspiration for Mechagodzilla. He was the direct stated inspiration because Toho in 1974, they wanted to make a 20th anniversary film for Godzilla, and someone said, well, we're running out of money, so what can we do? And then Teruyoshi Nakano, who was the special effects director at the time, said, you know what would be cool but also a little bit cheaper? What's that? Well, you remember that robot gorilla? The Mechani-Kong? Oh, yeah. Why don't we do that for Godzilla?
Nice.
Except Mechagodzilla was a lot more of a threat. He was a walking arsenal. What Mechani-Kong is pretty much limited to his Batman utility belt with the grenades that he never uses again.
Yeah.
And his little flashing disco ball pyramid on his head that gets taken out because Nomura's a sharpshooter, unlike all the bad guys in this movie who went to stormtrooper school.
He rolled a 20.
Yeah. And then, and he has high beams.
Yep.
The best superpower that Mechani-Kong has at his disposal is, blinding you with his high beams.
High beams, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it works.
So apparently he thinks he can kill Kong like most people do accidentally with deer.
Okay, not to get too explaining things, but I suppose giving him high beams makes sense. He's supposed to be basically a digging robot.
That actually makes sense.
It does make sense. Now, why you make a gorilla into a digging robot, I don't know. There's other animals that would try first, but...
We dig.
So
diggy diggy hole, diggy diggy hole. I hope I'm sure most of you will get that. I hope you get that. Maybe I'll have Jimmy put a link to that on YouTube. It's a YouTube video with these Tolkien-esque dwarves making up a song about how they dig in mines. Yeah. It's actually quite hilarious. One more thing about Madame Piranha. It's interesting that they never tell us what country she's from. And we were actually theorizing a little bit based on some of the dialogue.
But then they basically she said later on, like, you don't even know my nation.
Yeah.
So we figured it must just be a made up nation. But it was interesting to me. They kept kind of throwing out all these possible answers.
Yeah.
And you feel like there should be an answer, but then it kind of...
Yeah,
like,
I think the only thing that I think we can know for sure is that it's apparently an Asian nation.
Yes.
They said there's a line related to that in here. I read one essay that insisted that she was supposed to be an implied communist Chinese, and I'm like, they said she's not Chinese.
Unless there's lies, but this seems a very straightforward thing.
And all she says is, you don't even know my nation's name, and it's not a very nice country and all that. Up until then, we actually were kind of thinking, well, maybe she's North Korea.
Yeah.
Which made a weird amount of sense until she says, you don't know my country's name. And then I thought, well, maybe it's Taiwan because Taiwan was under martial law at the time that this movie was made. And that's a whole to-do right there. That, that's a can of worms I'm not willing to open at this point.
And yet, I'm leaning towards, personally, from the context of the movie at least, that it's just sort of unexplained.
Yeah.
In a different movie, I might push it more, but I'm not sure I can push it.
Yeah. Well, and I think by leaving it ambiguous like that, but only really confirming that it's supposed to be a communist Asian nation, I think is what we're supposed to take on, and a nation that is seeking to create a nuclear arsenal and make itself a player.
Yes.
on the international stage. I mean, like I said, that could be referring back to a lot of things. I don't think it would have been necessarily the Chinese. They had gone nuclear well before this. The idea of it being North Korea would have been fascinating because obviously that was something they were always trying to do. Mm-hmm. But what it really boils down to is that she comes from some podunk communist Asian nation that is trying to assert itself.
Yeah.
And Doctor Who is offering that to them.
Why not? He just wants money, and this is apparently the easiest way to do it.
Yes. Although
what we'll do tonight, Brain, try to take over the
world. or rather sell it lots of cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Although it's interesting, one of the essays I read pointed this out. In a very Honda-esque fashion, we have this Element X, the MacGuffin,
yes,
of our movie, because we never see the stuff.
It glows.
It might have been the Upside Down. I don't know. Yeah, but the references just keep coming. But in a very Honda-esque fashion, this stuff that is essentially super plutonium is acquired by nobody.
Yeah. I mean, and it's true because basically no one gets it. Everyone has the good guys get their happy ending, and then there's none of the bad guys get anything. I mean, Madame Piranha dies redeemed. I guess you wouldn't put it that way, but she still dies. And then Doctor Who suffers a horrible death.
We're going to keep going back to that, aren't we? It's a very happy episode of the Monster Island Film Vault today. What's also interesting is in this one, in that Kong suit, which looks terrible when it's wet. I just want to throw that out there. And interestingly, it was covered in dog fur. And I can confirm, I've been on the island long enough to tell you that Kong does smell like a wet dog when he gets wet.
Speaking of which, on this island, is Mechani-Kong here, or did it not get reconstructed?
We haven't put him back together yet.
Oh, so it's like you need all the King's men and all the King's horses.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We haven't put Mechani-Kong together again. Yeah, okay. Not quite yet.
Someday, right?
Someday.
Or is that a good idea?
We're not sure.
I guess if you want to go digging for something.
Putting him back together is one of your side projects when you're off work?
He has a lot of side projects.
Yes, he does, and I'm a little concerned about some of them.
I don't know what you use him for except for walking slowly or digging things or lighting up dark tunnels.
Yeah, well, some of the monsters need new caves to live in.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
We might have a use for him.
Okay.
But like I said,
I don't want to come back though.
Well, maybe we might use him to build a second resort. To go with the one that we already have here. I mean, that's where I'm putting you up for the night.
Okay, that'll work. Sounds good.
Part of the golden ticket.
The golden ticket's pretty nice.
Yeah, but anyway, so we have Haruo Nakajima, who famously played Godzilla for 18 years and 12 movies.
Nice.
And now he's Kong. And I think it's fascinating that he's the one guy who got to play the two biggest monsters ever in cinema. I mean, who can say that they've done that?
That's cool.
That is super cool when you stop and think about it. And he took the role very seriously. But Nakajima always took his suit acting very seriously. He studied animals at zoos when he was Godzilla in 1954. And I read that he went and studied the movements of animals for this movie, specifically gorillas. He actually watched how real gorillas work and how they moved and all that. And even was quoted as saying that when you put that suit on, it forces you to have to move differently. You can't move like a normal person.
Yeah.
So in a way, the costume was forcing him into character.
And generally, I haven't watched a lot of these kaiju movies, but generally, like all the special effects were effective.
I think the best special effects sequence, well, there's two that I think are probably the most effective. One is the scene on Mondo Island when Kong is captured with all the helicopters.
Yes.
There's some really nice cinematography with that, some really cool shots.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie anticipates more Kong because Kong uproots a tree and throws it at the helicopters. Not as accurate a throw as the rocks.
It is a tree.
But, he's groggy at that point because, another parallel to the original film, gas bombs.
Oh, yeah.
So, but in Kong Skull Island, his introduction in that movie is throwing a tree at a helicopter. Okay. And then the other one I really enjoyed is the climax.
The climax is very,
with that replica of Tokyo Tower, it is
nice.
Fantastic.
It is very nice.
And I will tell you, I want more kaiju film endings to be monsters fighting on top of buildings, because that would be really exciting.
Now they can go climb that tower in Dubai.
Oh, yeah, because that's now the tallest building in the world.
I don't know how you get them there.
They'll come up with some reason.
Yeah, some sort
I
of.
mean, we'll just make a movie that follows the same logic that this one does, and they'll just, we'll find some cockamamie reason to get them there.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention that this is kind of interesting. This was made in the final year of Toho owning the license for King Kong, which they had purchased from RKO for $220,000.
Nice.
But they got to use Kong for 5 years. Unfortunately, they only made 2 movies in the course of those 5 years, and this was one of them. Destroy All Monsters was made in 1968, and they wanted to have Kong in it. But the license expired, and they didn't renew it, and it makes me sad because we almost had King Kong in Destroy All Monsters. He would have been fighting Ghidorah.
That would have been awesome.
It would have been amazing. So I like to think that somewhere out in the multiverse, there is a universe where King Kong is in Destroy All Monsters.
Nice.
Now, I've realized we've talked about a lot of the characters except for Susan.
Susan, yeah, she was a decent character.
Yeah, she was a forerunner to a lot of the love interests for Kong that we'll see later, because in both the 76 remake and the Peter Jackson version, the girls who catch Kong's eye are sympathetic toward him.
Mm-hmm.
So she was not Anne from the original movie, who was terrified of Kong the entire time.
No, she's like, I'll go up there and talk to him.
I'm going to go up there and talk to him. Which, unfortunately, I did read an essay. It's the same guy I had mentioned before who was talking about... I mentioned this in the previous episode with Tim.
Mm-hmm.
This guy who was arguing that all of the movies that came after the original infantilized Kong.
Oh.
And he indicts this movie by saying that his girlfriend in this movie is a cajoling girlfriend, as opposed to Kong being this strong masculine presence who just takes the woman and all of this stuff, and and she's a modern woman and a cajoling girlfriend, and just blah blah blah, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, dude, knock it off.
So at the end, she's like, go destroy that ship.
Yeah.
Like, then he should come back like, okay, no, go rob a bank for me. Get me a Danish.
Get me a Danish. Go take over a small Middle Eastern country for me.
I think it'd be a whole series of her just riding on his back saying, okay, do this now. It'd be awesome.
That would
She's
be
dressed
kind of
all in
amazing.
black, and she has like this kingdom and Kong's her.
Kong is her enforcer.
Oh yeah, it'd be great.
I like this idea. Although apparently that's what the King Kong show kind of is. I've seen one clip of the King Kong show, which is where he's fighting Mechani-Kong. And Doctor Who is from the show. He looks nothing like this. He looks like a short mad scientist with a bulbous head.
Okay.
Although he's Mechani-Kong's pilot, which is kind of interesting. And that's kind of what happens in there. From what I can gather, there's a boy in that one who kind of tells Kong what to do, and he goes and does it, because that's what he does. He's coaching Kong from the side and telling him, like, go punch Mechani-Kong. And Kong keeps trying to do it, even though all he does is hurt his hand, because Mechani-Kong doesn't get fazed by any of his punches. Unlike in this movie.
Yeah, the fighting's pretty, like, just smacked each other down. That dinosaur just got pummeled to pieces.
Yeah. Now, I bring up Susan because what's interesting is that actress, her name is Linda Jo Miller. She was 19 when she was in this movie. And I have to bring this up because, interestingly, while I was doing research on this, I went on one of the Kaiju fan Facebook groups that I'm in, and I asked a question as part of my research, and then someone tagged her. She is on Facebook.
Nice.
And she was in this group and said, hey, what do you remember about this? And then she piped into the conversation. I'm like... someone from these movies is in the Facebook group with us. Oh my gosh. I've kind of freaked out a little bit there. So, Linda, if you're listening to this is for you. I'm making sure to mention that not only were you in this movie, but I feel really sorry for you because you didn't get to redub yourself. Because if you watch the dub version of this movie, Rhodes Reason, the square-jawed hero in this, he got to redub himself with the lines that he said on set, because they dub all the Americans in Japanese. They did not let Linda do it because she was living in Japan as a military brat. She was a military brat. She was working as a model. And Arthur Rankin, I guess, saw a picture of her and he said, get her for this movie, even though she had no acting experience. So she got a lot of coaching from Akira Takarada. And I think Rhodes Reason as well. But because she was just a model and not a member of the Screen Actors Guild, she didn't get to redub herself for the English version. Except for, she says, for the scenes where she's screaming. That's actually her screaming. Everything else is some other actress. And I've looked up the dub actress's name. It's escaping me right now, but she makes Susan sound like a cartoon character.
Yeah, it kind of does.
It's a little sad. Although speaking of cartoon characters, Paul Frees does Doctor Who in the dub version. And I'm like, why does his voice sound familiar? And I looked it up. He is Boris from Rocky and Bullwinkle, Moose and Squirrel.
which fits pretty darn well, actually.
Oh, it's wonderful. Also, one other thing we mentioned, this was the last film that Honda collaborated on with his cinematographer. This was also the last time that Honda directly collaborated with Eiji Tsuburaya. Tsuburaya died 3 years later, and his health began to deteriorate pretty quickly after this. So he wasn't as able to be involved with the films after this. We've made jokes already about this being a G-rated movie for the kids, but that was the intended audience for this. It was, it's a cartoon adaptation, a loose adaptation. So it very much feels like a children's movie, that moves along at this breakneck pace. It only explains enough about itself. It has enough logic to keep going, but if it stops, it has to think about its logic. So it's like it has to keep moving so it doesn't have to think. Because if it thinks too long, it'll collapse under its own illogic.
We'll just escape the jail and go to Madame Piranha's suite. In Doctor Who's base. And hang out here till he comes back and captures us.
And they never stay in the jail cell for more than 3 minutes.
So I can't see kids being all that interested with Madame Piranha trying to seduce.
I know. I actually found a very interesting quotation. It was one of the contemporary reviews at the time that was saying that, this is a kid's movie, but we have the sexuality of Madame Piranha must be there for the dads.
Oh boy.
Which I could see. But what's really sad is that there were people, including Honda and some of his crew members, that were frustrated by this point because they were wanting to make more serious movies geared at adults. It's like, why can't we make stuff like this for adults? And they were just being told all the time, kids are the audience for these now. You have to make it for the kids. And speaking of this being a kids movie and the contemporary reviews, oh goodness, I came across one that was just scathing. And honestly, this might be a good way to transition into our next segment. Oh my gosh. It almost sounds a little bit racist, to be honest, but this is from Vincent Canby of the New York Times.
Okay.
1968. He was quoted as saying, "The Japanese, who show the greatest delicacy in arranging flowers and manufacturing transistor radios, are all thumbs when it comes to making monster movies like King Kong Escapes.
Wow.
The Toho movie makers are quite good in building miniature sets, but much of the process photography," I feel like I need to start reading this in a really snooty voice.
Like Anton Ego.
Yeah. "Match the miniatures with the full-size shots is just bad. Really unforgivable, however, is what has been done to King Kong himself. The great dignified 80-foot ape of the 1933 Hollywood classic has been turned into a spineless, groveling Uncle Tom in the community of prehistoric beasts." What? I look at that and I think, did we see the same movie? That is mean.
People really want, it sounds like from this and from the other quotes you had that people really wanted the old bestial Kong back. And this was just a different, this happens every time you do sequels, things will change and people will want the old version. Not always, but it happens more often than not.
It bothers me to hear stuff like this. It's just people seem to have a very fixed, finite idea of what Kong should be. I don't understand why Kong has to stay in a certain mold, and yet Godzilla is allowed to evolve and mean different things.
Well, didn't people complain about Godzilla evolving too?
It depends on who you talk to, but generally speaking, people, at least in my experience, the fandom seems pretty happy with the different things.
What I'm saying is that this guy's contemporary. Did contemporary people not like how Godzilla was changing when it was happening? Looking back, people are like, "Oh, I like the whole range of stuff."
Yeah. Again, I think it would depend on who you're talking to. Honda certainly didn't like the turn that Godzilla eventually took, becoming a hero. But he also, I don't think, was too fond of the idea of there being sequels to the original Godzilla, period. And neither was Jun Fukuda, who directed 5 of the classic Godzilla films.
Okay.
He was second only to Honda, because Honda, I believe, if I remember correctly, he directed 8.
Okay.
And we're talking 8 out of the 15, and he did 5 out of the 15, and they both didn't think there should have been sequels. Which Godzilla was just making too much money, so I can understand that. But Godzilla had to evolve in order for them to keep making movies. You can't just make the 1954 film all the time. And that's the thing that bugs me a little bit about King Kong. No offense, big guy. if Jimmy is being crazy and broadcasting this out to them again, you're going to try to filter it through the Orca this time? Still haven't fixed it, have you? Anyway, it just seems like Kong keeps getting put into the same mold. Most of the movies that Kong is in is just recycling the same plot, or a lot of the same plot elements. 3 of them are essentially remakes. And this is one where it actually tries to branch out and do something different with Kong. It's very science fictional. It's very pulpy. It's cartoony. Kong is allowed to be more comical. There's still a lot of what makes Kong Kong in this. Heck, maybe not more so than in King Kong versus Godzilla. He's more bestial in King Kong versus Godzilla, a little less sympathetic, but he only really gets infatuated with a woman for maybe 10 minutes at the most. The whole movie is not about that.
Well, and if this isn't loosely inspired by the cartoon series is all about a boy basically controlling Kong. So you're not going to, you've already made that change in the source material.
Well, and more like they're best friends.
Okay, but still, there's a camaraderie that is not present in old Kong.
Yeah.
But it's already there from the source material.
Yeah. But I think the big problem is that, it's not a problem. It's a problem and a strength at the same time. It's just that first movie, that first story with Kong is just so perfect.
Yes.
That trying to do anything else, I think, is really difficult.
Anything else is almost a step down no matter what you do.
Yeah. Well, which some people would say the same thing about Godzilla films. Mm-hmm. But I do think the Godzilla films have had a slightly better track record with doing different things. Even when they got back to doing dark movies again, they were still putting very interesting spins on it. You look at Godzilla 1954, and then you look at Return of Godzilla from 1984, and they are in a lot of ways the same movie, but they contemporize it. Mm-hmm. It's steeped heavily in Cold War tensions and all of that. It was what makes the movie more distinctive. Shin Godzilla follows a lot of the same ideas and style as well, but it's also very different. They contemporize it, and they also make it different by making it a satire, a political satire, which you wouldn't necessarily pick up on unless you're up on your Japanese politics. Yeah. But that's beside the point. Go listen to the KVR episode on that, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But Kong doesn't seem to be given the same amount of latitude, and I think he should, because I don't think this is an infantilized version of Kong. But I also don't tend to read, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, gender politics into any of this. Yeah. This is just a fun story, and I like that it's different, where you have a sympathetic love interest, and Kong is less savage. I don't think he is completely without savagery. Look at poor Gorosaurus. Yeah. But he should be allowed to change and evolve. But again, try following up that original film. Mm. Like you said, everything else other than that is going to be seen as a step down.
Whether it is or not, yeah. And also cartoon logic.
Yes. All right. With that, let's move on to the Toku topic. With this episode, I'm anticipating the Toku topic to play out much like it did between myself and Tim. Tim, your co-host on Derailed Trains of Thought, which I should have mentioned at the beginning. Your podcast.
I probably should too. See, if Tim was here, he'd be like, "Why didn't you name drop us?"
But yes, Derailed Trains of Thought, wonderful podcast. Go listen to it.
It's good stuff.
Yes. So that was very much a philosophical conversation between myself and Tim, and I think today it will be similar. What I wanted to do with doing all this research on this film and on a lot of Toho's films from the 60s in particular, I started to notice what I thought were parallels between the American and Japanese cast and crew and executives, producers, and all that who were working on 5 films that Toho made with Americans. Just to rattle them all off for you quickly, would be Frankenstein Conquers the World, Invasion of Astromonster or Monster Zero, War of the Gargantuas, this film, and then finally Latitude Zero.
Is that the order they were made?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah. And I started to, hearing about all the things that were going on behind the scenes with these films, I started thinking, this sounds eerily similar to Japanese and American relations, in the international sphere. So it's like these were almost microcosms of what was going on. So all the big things, you're seeing happening just between individuals. And that was something I thought it would be interesting to talk about those happenings in this larger context.
So what were some of the interactions going on between the Japanese and American crew?
Well, we'll start with King Kong Escapes,
Okay.
Since we're talking about this film. There was a fair amount of foreign interference going on. Arthur Rankin thought Honda and his crew would make the movie sillier than it already was. So he sent Rhodes Reason to keep an eye on things. He asked for sets to be redressed because he thought the sets looked like they were at garage sales, and that's where all the props came from.
Oh, weird.
And he reworked his dialogue on the fly. I even found that out from Linda Miller on the Facebook group, that he would rewrite his own dialogue on the fly while they were working on it. And he thought his makeup made him look like a geisha girl.
Huh. I didn't come off that way. Wow.
Yeah. And he saw the Japanese filmmaking as primitive. He seriously called Honda a hack. And he even flat out said that the only real reason he took the job is because he wanted to take a trip to Japan.
That's nice.
And he was quoted as saying that Honda would direct me in strange and exotic ways only the Japanese would appreciate, and that there was nothing special about him.
Unfortunately, this sounds a little bit like Ignorant American Goes Abroad.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but I mean, you could certainly read it that way.
Yeah. He also said, I had to work to underplay, to bring the film some credibility. Weirdly enough...
I mean, granted, it is a silly film.
Yeah, it is. But weirdly enough, Honda was unfazed by his condescension. And according to some of Honda's cohorts, Reason and Honda got along pretty well. His assistant director thought it was because they had similar personalities.
Oh.
Which, I'm like, okay. Reason was brusque, but it made him confident. And so, because of that, he earned Honda's trust.
Okay.
And Arthur Rankin was... Not only was he having Reason keep an eye on things for him, but Rankin was observing things on behalf of RKO. So there's a couple layers of supervision going on here, because ultimately RKO is the one, they're the parent of King Kong. They're the true owners of King Kong.
I mean, and certainly even all other things, even two different nations have two different ways of filming and doing things, and you're working with a interesting script, which I don't know where it came from originally. Which side?
I've gotten a couple different... I'm a little confused on that myself, because I thought it was Kimura. Almost every source I looked at credits it only to Kimura, Takeshi Kimura, which is why the movie feels uneven. It was something we didn't bring up in the previous section. It feels a little tonally uneven because Kimura loved writing dark stuff like Matango, but this movie is incredibly silly. So I feel like that's why the material is incredibly silly, but everything's being played straight, and why there's gruesome deaths and things like that in it, because it's this weird mishmash of sensibilities, which hurts the movie, I think, a little bit, because this really should have gone to Sekizawa.
Yeah.
Originally, Sekizawa had written a film adaptation of this, but it got turned into a Godzilla movie because Rankin-Bass didn't like it.
Okay. Fun.
Yeah.
So was that sort of like, I guess, Americans looking down on the Japanese? Was that normal for these other productions?
Yeah, there was some of that on a couple of the other films. Most notably, War of the Gargantuas and definitely Latitude Zero. Oh my gosh, it was bad on Latitude Zero. Oh man. And I'll probably be expanding on a lot of this stuff when I get to my episodes on that. But the one that for me is the most difficult to stomach, other than hearing some of the stuff that Rhodes Reason was saying, was Russ Tamblyn on War of the Gargantuas. I have heard people I've heard one person, I should say, try to defend Russ Tamblyn, and he fails miserably at trying to defend this guy. He was a jerk. Nobody on the set of War of the Gargantuas liked him. But he went there. He was this American who's like, I was in West Side Story. I'm too good for this monster movie. That was pretty much that's the impression I get, because...
So you're saying that superhero movies are not real movies?
Yeah, just like Scorsese. Yeah, it's not real cinema. So Honda frequently clashed with Tamblyn. He would do the opposite of what Honda would tell him to do as the director. He's the freaking director, and he would just do the opposite of what he would tell him. Seiji Tani, who was the assistant director, that I mentioned him without his name earlier, he called him a hoodlum turned actor and an a-hole and a punk.
This sounds like good working conditions.
Yeah. He reportedly would improvise lines about bad LSD trips. I mean, you've seen more of the Gargantuas, so I mean, you can kind of understand. Yeah, but you're at least kind of familiar with what I'm talking about here. He was quoted as saying, "There was one interpreter that spoke English, and he interpreted between myself and Honda, and myself and the actors. Lucky for me, they didn't know what I was saying half the time, so I changed all my lines. My lines were so bad in the original script, I changed them all."
Fun.
And if you watch the movie, he has this very disinterested, flat performance the entire time. I'm like, what is your deal, dude? I mean, say what you want about Nick Adams. We'll talk a little bit about Nick Adams. Maybe Russ Tamlin's a better actor than Nick Adams, but when I watch Nick Adams in any of these movies, he's clearly passionate about what he's doing and enjoying himself. This guy thought he was too good for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I get it. You were one of the best movies ever made. And I love West Side Story. It's one of my favorite movie musicals. But what the heck, man? This is your job. Do your job. Yeah. And he caused a lot of problems on set. He'd wander off to a dangerous cliff and climb it and then go back to his hotel and never socialize with anybody. He did say one sort of nice thing about Honda, which was, I liked working with him because he didn't give me much direction. The best directors I worked with gave me little direction. I'm going to go on a limb and say that was Honda's quiet little way of saying he doesn't want to deal with your crap. But as bad as that was, Latitude Zero was even worse.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah. That one was just, oh my gosh. Again, I'll expand on this more when I get to that episode. But to suffice it to say, you had this American writer who wrote a radio serial in the 40s called Latitude Zero, wanted to make a movie out of it, and it tried to make it into a television show before this. That didn't work. And then got Toho to agree to help make the movie with them. And there was another studio that they were working with called Ambassador Productions. And they were supposed to split the cost of the movie and all of that. Then what happened was there was a producer from Ambassador Productions who would try to work on the failed TV version, and he was just trying to micromanage everything on set. He would patrol the sets, and he would make frequent complaints and demands and criticisms. Oh, does this sound a little familiar? And then would make criticisms of Japanese filmmaking due to his concerns of how the film would be received in the U.S. And the Japanese crew disliked him so much. There was a caveman henchman in that movie that ended up not getting in the movie, but they nicknamed him Warren.
Nice.
And I think there was actually a scene where they were supposed to drop him into a vat of burning acid or lava or something like that. So the Japanese crew hated him so much they had to use that for their catharsis.
Nice.
And he didn't understand. Since he came from a TV background, he tried to dictate to Honda how to shoot it using multiple cameras and all of that. And he's like, but that's not how we do things. And then he just did a complete 180 when he realized, oh, these people aren't incompetent. But the biggest thing that happened was he didn't mention that his production studio was on the verge of bankruptcy when they were making this. Yeah. So his studio went under, and then Toho ended up having to foot the bill for the rest of the movie's production.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And Honda mentioned later they felt like he had been tricked.
Yeah, well, yeah, you would feel that way.
Yeah, what's really weird is while this was going on, this was so bad that Joseph Cotton, one of the actors, the American actors on Latitude Zero, claims he heard people talking about harakiri while this was going on. And I'm thinking, I think that's the ugly American talking there. Yeah. Or you're just telling a funny story, because I'm pretty sure that probably wasn't going on. If that was the case, I would have been hearing about Toho suicides or something, because Toho had other failed films. But but Tomoyuki Tanaka, the producer, big producer at Toho, when commenting about Latitude Zero's poor performance, he said, "It was a fun story, but it turned out boring. Honda couldn't get a hold of how to use CinemaScope properly." What was one of his difficulties. That was a legitimate problem on the film. "And the project only showed how difficult it was to make a co-production with another country."
Which seems, these examples seem to show that.
Yeah.
You said like Nick Adams really liked it, but generally...
Oh, yeah. Nick Adams had nothing but the utmost respect for Honda. In fact, Nick Adams even offered to host Honda's son Ryuji in a post-college homestay program.
Nice.
Unfortunately, Nick Adams died before that could happen. And Honda loved him so much he invited him to his house, and they had dinner
Nice.
together with his family.
But the production company certainly had trouble interacting properly.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, American production companies have trouble interacting with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, like, who owns Spider-Man kind of thing. You mean?
Yeah, that's complicated.
So I mean,
I remember that big tug of war going on between Disney and Sony, and
so I suppose, to be fair, even same cultures can have very vastly different understandings of properties, and then when you throw two different cultures together. But then again, America and Japan had a growing relationship at this point, and
oh, your team Disney with the Spider-Man thing. Oh, it's just because they have Star Wars.
Yeah,
I know how you feel about Star Wars.
He's jealous.
Yeah. But anyway,
some of the research I was doing, and I'm not an expert on Japanese-American international relations.
Yeah. Although I'm sure my old podcast gave you a nice crash course
more
in
there
that.
than anywhere. No, but I mean, obviously we have a complicated relationship because they were enemies, and then MacArthur went in there and we did the whole occupation.
And we gave them a new constitution and all of that. It's fascinating looking at that portion of the history because we Americans were incredibly kind to them. That we didn't turn them into some sort of American colony. No. We went in there to our enemies and we essentially helped them put their country back together, and then we left and said, okay, take care of yourselves. And I mean, there were some practical applications for that. Japan was an incredible asset during the Korean War.
Well,
and it was very good for the United States to have an ally during the Cold War in that region.
Well, that's what's so interesting about around this time is that you got the Cold War, and Japan's the only democracy, Western-friendly country over there. So America has to make sure they keep a good relationship. And there's some notes I had found about the CIA trying to be like, you make sure we keep them on our side and doing all that sort of stuff. So there's this thing called the Yoshida Doctrine.
Mm-hmm. Named after one of the prime ministers.
Right around when they signed for the
Security Treaty?
Yes, back in 59 or something like that.
Oh, that's when it was renewed in 1960.
Yes, when they renewed and they changed some of the terms and stuff like that. Yeah, but that largely, and this doctrine that was coined after he went through all this, that Japan was going to work economically, try to not spend the money doing military stuff, let America take care of that, and really work on reestablishing being an economic powerhouse.
Which they were definitely doing at this point. The 1960 is generally when the Japanese economic miracle is said to have actually started. And a large part of why they were having to approach things militarily the way they were was because of Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, where they essentially renounced war.
And it sounds like that Japan wanted to keep it that way. Like they weren't trying. I mean, they'd become more pacifist from my understanding anyways. From my understanding, America kind of did want to push the rearmament for the sake of the Cold War and the Korean War and stuff like that. And Japan resisted to a certain extent.
Yes.
And I think this is wrapped in what people called it now, the Yoshida Doctrine, is you resist so that you have more, you can throw your effort into economics.
Yes.
And then they made a lot of money off the Korean War, helping America, a lot influx of stuff. So you have this interesting dynamics where America still views them as kind of their, not their pawn, but their
favorite son.
Their favorite son, their ally out there. It's still a very exotic place. It's it's not an equal yet in their mind, even though Japan's trying to establish himself as equal in the world scene again, trying to join the UN, trying to, the Olympics came what was that?
In 1964.
That was a big stepping stone for them. And so you have this, they're trying to go out in the world and they're starting to export their culture. People are starting like kaiju movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, anime.
But America doesn't quite, from my understanding, view them quite as equal yet. They're an ally, they're a necessary thing, but they're a foreign thing.
There's still some otherness.
Yeah, otherness, and I think
to them, even though the United States established them as a democracy, they radically changed the country.
Yes.
Making the emperor a figurehead and not their leader, and all of that sort of stuff.
That's some of our confusion here, is that they're both very similar and very different for Americans.
Yes.
And Americans, it's the exact, there's the sushi and the geisha and all this stuff that comes out that the Americans view, but they're also a Western ally. So we got this, don't know how to understand them, I think, for the common American.
Yeah, and I do think that there's some of that otherness and maybe even some residual feelings from the war, I do think played into some of the things that, like these film
Yeah.
critics and all of that, and some of these actors and some of these producers and all that are still thinking of Japan in that way. I mean, one of them had to be shocked into believing, oh my gosh, you people aren't incompetent.
Well, and that's, sometimes it's just a sort of like, people always think their culture knows best anyways.
Yeah.
But, so those foreign, silly. Well, and it's interesting too, because even Japanese exports, before the war were primitive.
Yeah.
And then made in Japan meant something very different.
Yes.
About 20 years later.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I think you intellectually know, but when you get there, you're still thinking, oh, that's old Japan samurais and whatever.
Yeah,
and they're very modernized, and they modernize in ways faster. It was interesting. There's this work method called gaishan, which sounds like the Americans helped introduce back during the occupation, and then they just took it and ran with it, and it just made they took stuff and adapted it to their style of economy and culture fabulously, and we didn't know how to understand that. I think.
Yeah. Well, what is it?
It basically is a continuously improving stuff. Basically, everyone's in charge of pointing out a problem and reporting and figuring out solutions. It's sort of like, it's not a top-down method as much as like everyone's in this together is my understanding.
Which is a very Japanese thing. Japanese culture, well, a lot of Asian cultures in general, are very communal in nature.
So, like,
whereas Americans are individualistic.
Like, here's an example, like Toyota's production line can be stopped at any time by anyone who sees abnormality, and everyone is tasked to solve the issue as soon as possible. You plan it, you check, it's just this rapid, you find a problem, everyone works together and fix it, and you just keep moving forward. And it's probably a different mentality than Americans had necessarily at that point in some of their industries. Yeah,
well, if what you're talking about, how it's not top down, it's that everyone's in this together. It's because, like I said, Japanese culture is very communal in nature, whereas Americans are individualistic, and I guess to a certain extent more hierarchical in a way, at least in terms of business.
But it's interesting then too, because I've never seen Tora.
But I need to see it.
But it sounds like,
yes, I know you agree with me.
But I think in his best conception, it really wanted to be a retelling of Pearl Harbor, where there's no one's the bad guy. So Shakespearean tragedy, and Kurosawa was going to do the Japanese version. I think there were issues with it coming out as well as they wanted it to.
Yeah.
But so there was, by the 70s, this idea of this unified nature. And apparently even right before this, they were trying that in some of these co-productions, but they were just having trouble.
Yeah, there was just a lot of disagreement over how things needed to be done. This wasn't in my notes from what I can see, but one thing that was interesting going back to Frankenstein Conquers the World, Henry G. Saperstein, who had an established relationship with Toho, then said, let's make some movies together. And Frankenstein Conquers the World was the first one. He demanded a certain ending for Frankenstein Conquers the World, which was that he wanted Frankenstein to fight a giant octopus because he had seen the giant octopus scene in King Kong vs. Godzilla, which was a real octopus.
Okay.
He was so impressed by it that he wanted them to do that again with this Frankenstein movie. Honda didn't necessarily want to, but they went ahead and did it anyway, which required extra time and money. And then they made this ending and showed it to the guy, and he said, it doesn't look good enough. And then he told them to take it out. And so now they're sitting there probably thinking, why did we bother?
Yeah.
That's the sort of things. And that probably would have happened in a lot of other productions, but there seems like there was a lot of producer oversight with these co-productions because the Americans were very concerned about how these movies were going to play to the American audiences. They have different standards about how things should look and how things should be done. And
you got to understand, too, I guess, after World War II, America became superpower. And so, I mean, that certainly affects your view of how your place in the world.
Yeah, and history is written by the victors.
And so I wonder, as much as, Japan's relationship is changing with the world, America is changing with the world, too, and it creates this sense of, the worst versions is a sense of arrogance. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, but it does probably in our relation with the world, that is how it comes off sometimes.
Yeah.
And maybe in these cases, it's like, now you're coming out of your backwards sense, but we're America.
Yeah. I think there's a certain level, especially at this time. We're talking about the 60s.
60s, yeah.
Since the end of the war. There's seems to be a strong paternal sense between the United States and Japan at this point, where I don't think it's that Americans hate Japan.
No, I don't think they look down
I mean,
on
there's probably worse some people who did, but as a whole, generally speaking, Americans liked Japan and liked the Japanese, but there's that sense of we're dad.
Yeah.
We put you back together. We're overseeing you and you're doing stuff for us. We have to keep you safe because you're not allowed to have an offensive military, which is still a controversy to this day. There are still debates going on about Article 9 in Japan because the whole world scene has completely changed, and it made sense at the time. I will say, immediately after World War II, and for at least a decade or two after that, it made sense. But given Japan's position now, they need to have a stronger military and to take care of themselves.
And at least
and they want to. That's one of the big themes. One of these days, I will screen Shin Godzilla for you, and you're going to see that in action because that's one of the big themes in Shin Godzilla. Japan wants to take care of itself.
But Yoshida Doctor seems like it was a way of Japan rebuilding itself economically and really using that as a tool for being an important part of Western society. It connects itself to the U.S. because they're the ones buying everything, but a lot of the Asian nations aren't buying their more expensive stuff now. But the downside then is it does still leave that, well, America has to protect them. In this middle Cold War era stuff. While it was probably very helpful for bringing Japan to where it is now, probably did also foster some of that paternal nature in the American view of it.
Yeah.
Like today, like I found Americans love Japan now.
Oh, yes.
We have no it's things that like 84% of Japanese people feel close to the U.S. and 87% of Americans say they have a favorable view of Japan. I mean, there is none of that at this point.
In the 60s?
No, that was today.
Okay.
I mean, today now I think whatever miscommunication there was in the 60s, 70s is gone.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't an easy road.
No.
Though, because you had all of this going on, like I said, probably residuals from the war and so that paternal nature, because that definitely seems reflected with some of these producers who were trying to, it's like, you have to make the movie a certain way,
And then we moved into protectionist phase where we're all threatened by Japanese cars and stuff.
Yeah, that was a big thing in the
80s,
late 80s, early 90s. There were people who were more terrified of Japan than they were of the Soviet Union because they thought the Japanese were so powerful economically that they were just going to come in and buy everything in the United States. And then ironically the bubble burst and they crashed economically and they haven't fully recovered ever since. They are no longer at the height that they were at with the economic miracle, which is a tremendous irony. But they've continued to export their gross national cool. Anime is almost ubiquitous now.
I mean, everyone knows Godzilla.
Everyone knows Godzilla now. And I mean, even people who aren't the hardcore anime fans still know things like Studio Ghibli.
Yeah.
And Miyazaki. So Japan is like I said, is just ubiquitous now. That's unheard of. Really, it is. A lot of American pop culture gets shipped over there. Yeah. And they eat it up.
Yeah,
they love it.
There's very much a two-way street at this point. I mean, it's an even two-way street as opposed to this. The co-productions here seem to be they're trying, but they can't quite figure out how to do it evenly. Yeah,
I just find it so interesting, especially looking at if you're comparing Nick Adams to Russ Tamblyn and just their attitudes. Where Nick Adams, he's one of those Americans that he loves the Japanese, loves what they do, and had the utmost respect for Honda. And then Russ Tamblyn just says, screw you, I'm too good for this. I'll do what I want. And Honda being Honda takes it in stride, but I think eventually he just kind of decided, you know what, you do what you want.
And I think it very much depends on, your attitude. Obviously, Nick Adams was more than like, hey, I'll learn stuff and this is fun. And, versus like, I know what, you're not.
I know better.
You're not Doctor Who being like, ha ha ha, I have spoiled everyone. And meanwhile, like, all your inventions fail, but you're still like, ha ha ha, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And it was definitely much more, Nick Adams' attitude was definitely much more in keeping with what Honda wanted to do. You'll see in even some of these movies that I've mentioned, there are story elements that are reflecting this partnership, I guess you could say, between the United States and Japan, this favorite son sort of thing. But Honda treated them both as equals. In Invasion of Astro Monster, Monster Zero, the two main characters are Nick Adams, who's an American astronaut, and Akira Takarada playing a Japanese astronaut. They're best friends.
Yeah.
And they go on missions together. They banter together. They've clearly known each other for a long time. And when they go to Planet X and they plant a flag there, which, interestingly, this was 4 years before the moon landing.
Nice.
They plant a flag there, and it has 3 flags. It has Japan, the United States, and the UN.
Yep.
I love that. And nobody makes a big deal about it. That right there is, I think, in that microcosm, is Honda's idealized relationship between the United States and Japan. They are equals and they are friends.
Yep.
And they are going off and accomplishing great things together.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Well, I think that just about wraps things up here. Thank you once again, Nick, for joining me here. I know you're on your podcast. You're a little more used to talking about story and not history.
Hey, it was fun. It was fun. Actually, I really enjoyed doing the research, and at least the time I had to do it. And it was like, oh, this is interesting stuff. Like, I like history more and more now than when I was a kid. I'm like, now I find history pretty fascinating.
Yeah, especially when you get to hang out in Monster Island's librry to do it, right?
And this is way more warm and sunny than it is back in Kendallville at the moment.
Oh yes, you guys are in the middle of an early winter practically.
Oh, yeah. So, and again, not the safest place I've ever been for a podcast, but not the worst I've ever been.
Yes, so. I've listened to every episode of your show. I do know
worse than others. Yeah,
but is there anything you want to plug real quick before we go on?
So I'm a co-host with Timothy Deal, who was on the last episode. Oh no, 2 episodes ago.
Yes,
we do Derailed Trains of Thought, your premier podcast on storytelling. I get it on iTunes and Stitcher and and Spotify. And it's all about storytelling, and it's a lot of fun, and I think you should go listen if you have not. And we also do another podcast called The Weekly Hijack, where we just hijack some TV show we're watching, which we're just finishing up, Babylon 5.
Oh, yes.
Which you have not watched, you really need to watch, because this is a great science fiction show. Or even if you haven't watched it, you can listen to us talk about it.
I do both, actually.
Yes. Nice.
I have seen the show, and I love listening to your episodes.
Have you seen Crusade?
No, I have not.
Ah,
I have not, but I did get that for you for your birthday a few years ago.
I'm glad, because I now own almost every Babylon 5 thing except for Lost Tales.
Well done.
Yes.
Well
Anyways.
done. Yeah. Just to let you know, listeners, my next episode will be a mini analysis. It will be a mini analysis of the infamously banned film Half Human.
Interesting.
So another Honda classic. Except this is one that Toho likes to keep locked away in the vault and pretend it never happened. And you'll learn a little bit more about why in that episode. And then, just to let everybody know, the schedule is going to get tweaked a little bit, but since the release date for Godzilla vs. Kong, which I intended to be the culmination of what I'm calling the Kong Quest, I should have brought this up at the beginning of the episode. I can't believe I got 3 movies deep on this coverage and I didn't bring this up on the air, but I'm trademarking it now, the Kong Quest.
Spelled with a K?
Yes.
KWEST Quest, maybe? I don't know.
Something like that. So I'm going to be doubling up on the full-length film discussion episodes in both January and February to make sure that I get all of the movies covered before Godzilla vs. Kong, assuming it stays with that March release date. So next month, for January, the next big film discussions will be the 1976 remake, and wherein my co-host will be Ben Avery, author and podcaster and monster fan.
Nice.
Followed by its ill-advised sequel, King Kong Lives, from 1986, I believe. Jimmy will probably correct me if I'm wrong, which will feature, once again, as I mentioned in the previous episode, John LeMay, who is one of the few fans of that movie I have met. In fact, I think he's the only one. So you have a lot of interesting things to look forward to, listeners. So, Jimmy, before we sign off, you got anything else?
Nope, Jimmy, that's all I've got, too.
Cue credits. Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nathan Marchand. If you enjoy the show and want to join the discussion, we'd love to hear from you. So email us at feedback@monsterislandfilmvault.com. Your message could be read on a future episode of the show. Our website is monsterislandfilmvault.com. Follow us on Facebook at Monster Island Film Vault and on Twitter, where our handle is The Monster Isla 1. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter at NASAJimmy. I have fulfilled my contractual obligations. The podcast logo was created by Tyler Souls from TylerDrawsComics.com. Our theme song is Wander on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack, Battle with the Colossus, and The Open Way, Battle with the Colossus by Ko Otani from the video game Shadow of the Colossus. It can be downloaded from ocremix.org. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, and other fine podcatchers. Please rate and review the podcast to help spread the word about the show. The Monster Island Film Vault is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production. Sayonara! A few hours later. Hey, Jimmy. I just got Nick checked into the Monsterland Resort Hotel. Are you flying him back to Indiana in the SY3 tomorrow morning? Okay, good. Now we need to start ramping up for Godzilla and Kong's rematch in March, so... What do you mean, it won't happen? They're not talking to each other? Do the scientists know why? No, huh? Did Mothra try to talk to him? They wouldn't listen to her either? Maybe they need some counsel from Reverend Mifune. You know, the island's new chaplain? Maybe he could use the orca to... That won't work. Why? It's broken again? I thought you fixed it. Really? When Madison Russell and her dad were inspecting Monarch Outpost 83 here on the island, she smashed it with a hammer because she was angry you'd rebuilt it? When do you think you'll have it fixed now? November 2020? We'll have to wait that long for Godzilla and Kong to settle their differences for their rematch? Oh, sheesh. Time to revamp the podcast schedule. Again.